Ce is hallo?
Blijven.
Bist du sicher wegen dem?
Yo je iets niet, joh.
Two outlaws on the lam, taking the back roads through America.
You can't drink enough coffee for this show.
And now it's time for Monday Madness with the Moped Outlaws, Greg and Mark.
And here we are, episode 60.
Okay, you know what's iconic about this episode? I just turned 60 2 days ago.
Really?
Yeah.
How did I not know that we went to the concert? Oh, I see. No, I get it. I get what's happening here.
So episode 60.
And 2 days after your 60th birthday.
Yeah, and I'm 60. Yeah.
Wow. Happy birthday, Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll tell you off air a little bit about that.
Okay. About turning 60.
No, I don't know about turning 60 just yet. You're going to go through that portal ahead of me. God willing, and the creek don't rise.
So wait, last week you said something that we were supposed to remember about misappropriation, and I forget what it was.
Well,
at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, we were talking about music, and we decided, well, we were going to save that part of the conversation for this episode, which is this idea that, you know, all of white music is
there we go.
A derivative of African music. And there's several ways to look at this, right? This kind of idea. One of the things I love that's he's dumping water on his head, but it's not working. They should have confiscated that water bottle from you. In one of Santana's latest records called Africa Speaks, he pays homage to all of the African rhythms and the sounds of African style music, because even he knows that the roots of music go all the way back to the roots of civilization. And so, you know, even after, I don't know, man, how many albums Santana's released, a lot. He's like, okay, I've got to do this one called Africa Speaks. And he's got African vocalists, and, you know, the styles are multiple time signatures and different modalities of musicality and all of these things. And so we were discussing, like, okay, how are we going to address this subject of the derivative nature of rock and roll in particular and jazz. And then the subject of Elvis came up, and was Elvis a racist or was Elvis a bigot? And that's sort of the jumping off point for this. And I think it's an interesting discussion, and I'm not sure Greg and I see eye to eye on this, or ear to ear, as the case may be. But we're going to find out.
Yeah. So, was Elvis a bigot? No, the answer is no. And so we're done. Okay. Short episode. I'm old. I don't have the energy to do long episodes now. I am watching Mark massage his bare scalp. What a goddamn, when art doesn't show up, fucking things fall apart quickly. We have no idea what we were supposed to remember.
So what were you saying about Elvis?
He was not a bigot. And here's what drives me a little nuts is
are you saying Elvis had little nuts?
I'm saying Elvis had no nuts at all. And that's why he didn't sing in a high voice. He had a very low voice, I have not seen anyone who interacted with him say he was a bigot. And as far as appropriation of music, now I do think that one Led Zeppelin song is absolutely stealing. Like, they just stole the song, and they have songwriting credits on that song. And I forget the song it is. But as far as appropriating, like, black music, white music, Native American music, suck my dick music, okay? Because music is music, man. Like, you just get influenced by anything you hear. I'd be a damn fool if I didn't see a fire show of John Lee Hooker and not think to myself, fuck, man, I want to put that kind of fire into what I'm creating.
Well, you can look at 60s rock and roll and just read the biographies of the Rolling Stones and various other people, the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. And they all just openly admit that the way they got to their musical education was by listening to black blues records and soul records from Chess and those things. And so the idea that it wasn't appropriated music is just full of shit. Of course it was. It was absolutely appropriated music. And they took that form and they made it the thing that they do without asking permission, or, they just decided, okay, we're just going to copy this stuff. And, one person could say that, a lot of that music is copying itself in terms of the simplicity of the form or whatever. But the reality is the history of black art. And I'm just going to say right now that I am not even close to qualified to really critique black art on any level in terms of my educational background and what I've studied. But I can see from my vantage point of white privilege that jazz music, it came literally, and I wrote a paper about this in high school, it came literally out of the slave fields into the churches. And it was an answer to the repressive forces and the pent up energy that went into the spiritualism of gospel music and jazz music was a direct creative expression of brilliance from repressed African peoples. And so the atonality and rhythmic structures of jazz are a direct reflection of the lack of European limitations of the whole idea of the 8-note scale, and that was the only form of music that could be beautiful. And when you start to break down, I mean, jazz is traditionally, quote, an American born art form. But it was born from the oppression of African peoples, and particularly in the South and in New Orleans. And that music has a level of sophistication, complexity, and beauty that is way beyond the invention of anything since. And it came from Black people. And then other peoples, other types of ethnic groups started to learn the language of jazz and express themselves. And it still doesn't come close in terms of its depth, complexity, and beauty to, the true originators are. And even...
No, that's not true. Look, and here's the thing. I think any musician, they don't have color involved. They just hang out with each other. Oh my God. Every time we rebuttal, you're going to rub your scalp. Hey, Uncle Fester. Uncle Fester, debating with Uncle Fester. That's the thing. I think when creative people hang out, they just hang out, and they love the creativity and interaction they're having with each other. That Dave Chappelle podcast I referred to last episode, he and I forget the guy's name from Wu-Tang. Anyway, they're talking about when Dave did a show at Punchline and Robin Williams showed up, and then the three of them were on stage. And
Dave, Robin Williams, and who was the third guy?
The guy from Wu-Tang. And I forget his name. And part of what happened is the guy from Wu-Tang and Robin started doing this rap hip hop thing back and forth with each other. And I forget what it's called. Anyway, like they, and to hear Dave and this gentleman from Wu-Tang talk about Robin was with such admiration for the creativity and love of this individual. And that's what creativity is. It's love, and love gives. It spreads out. It doesn't hoard itself. Oh, I only belong in this box. No, fuck you. Okay. I get angry. Yeah, I get angry. I have my own Shempa in regards to this. I reckon.
Well, and I just want to say that, Robin Williams went on to have one of the most prolific rap careers of any white guy ever.
Yeah, he called himself Eminem, hooked up with Dr. Dre, and rose to the top like cream.
he was a brilliant comedian, and that was based on his, who he was as a human, but also the training he got. Like he went to Juilliard. He really studied his craft, and
he went to college in Marin.
Well, for a while, yeah. But the drama department at Juilliard is where he
went to
really,
Redwood High.
Yeah,
I think just doing it consistently, it didn't matter where it happened. He was consistently hitting the boards, working on his craft. Yeah. And he was a brilliant mind. Like he was, whatever it was about him. And Dave even alluded to this, that there was an element of protection involved, because you'll really like those podcasts when you check them out.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, one of the things Dave talks about is he's sharing a story with Robin, how Robin helped one of Dave's close friends who happened to be in the military. And he said when Robin heard this, he was like, oh, yeah, thanks for sharing it. Like he could see Robin was uncomfortable getting this kind of feedback about how he personally helped someone, and kind of went into that comedy thing that he was so great at, which was kind of a buffer of like, okay, yeah, like I don't want to be real in this moment, hearing how I affect someone's life. I'm going to jump into comedy, which has nothing to do with misappropriation.
Well, I mean,
but it does.
So I'm currently looking at a list from Google of the top jazz pianists of all time. And
the top jazz penises of all time?
Pianists.
Oh, okay.
Piano players.
The top
those who
pianist.
tickled the ivories with the most flatulence.
With their appendage.
Yeah, with their appendage. And there's a large gap of white people on this list. Like it's like more than 10.
Herbie Hancock's got to be on there.
Yeah, Thelonious Monk, Herbie Hancock, Oscar Peterson, Bud Powell, McCoy Tyner, Art Tatum, Keith Jarrett, Fats Waller, Jelly Roll Morton,
UB Blake. UB Blake.
Well, this is only the top 50. Let me see if Hubie's on here.
Oh, he's got to be on there. He was one of the OGs. OGs.
So I don't see Hubie Blake here, but it's only the top 42 that are showing on my list.
E like elephant. EUBIE.
Yeah, not on here. Red Garland, John Lewis, Wynton Kelly, Earl Hines, Cecil Taylor, Vince Guaraldi, Sonny Clark, Ramsey Lewis, Barry Harris, Tommy Flanagan. Right now, I'm going to read the white ones. Bob James. Where's another one? Dave Grusin. Chick Corea. He's not white.
Yeah.
Bill Evans, Dave Brubeck. All right, there are some significant names out there, but
yeah.
And here's another one. It's her name, Marion McPartland. She's white. But she's not a man. At least judging from her name.
We don't know that.
Right? Maybe she identified as jazz. I don't know. The point I'm making is that there is a significant historical legacy of originality that is related specifically to people of color and music. And a lot of the innovations happened outside the view of the marketplace. And it was the white artists that then brought it forward, because the marketplace, and this is the distinction here, the marketplace was attuned, capitalism is attuned to centering white people in it. And so the reason that Led Zeppelin had a massive hit with a blues song that they stole is because the marketing apparatus was geared towards them, not the originator of that song. And so, the thing that they did do that I think is helpful, a lot of rock acts, they talked about how Muddy Waters influenced them, particularly the Stones. And then also the granddaddy of them all, the slide player is the mythical slide player. I should remember his name right now.
Robert
Johnson, right? They woke white people up to that legacy of amazing black performers. And so in that sense, there's some serviceable aspects of having them, do what they did with the music, right? But there's also some oddities as we look at these sorts of expressions. A lot of Black innovators had largely white audiences. Like, one of the amazing things about Bob Marley, who is considered the grandfather of reggae music. Like, there's a lot of guys that Bob learned from, Joe Higgs, early Jamaican artists who Bob learned from. But ultimately, Bob is credited with breaking reggae music on the global stage.
He definitely did, yeah.
Black people didn't go to his shows. Like, the amount of Black people in those shows is really small. When you look at the photographs and you look at the video, Bob was playing to mostly white audiences.
You know what you just reminded me of is I was having a discussion with my brothers in Hayward just months ago. And we were talking about the Rolling Stones and Stevie Wonder. And they said Black people do not support their artists the way white people do throughout the lifetime of that artist's life. And they were saying, like, Rolling Stones can sell out the O2 Auditorium in England, 3 nights in a row. And I was saying, yeah, I bet you Stevie Wonder could too. And they're like, no, he couldn't do a stadium tour. People wouldn't show up.
Well, do you think there's a kind of economic classism there that is a part of that reality, not just the draw part, but the actual economic capacity to buy concert tickets at that level and those numbers? Like,
I brought that up, and if I'm recalling correctly, that was a factor, but they didn't think that was the whole picture. They believed that just as people, Black people in Western society do not support their artists the way white people support their artists.
Well, how white of them to make those judgments about Black people? Like, how the hell would they know?
Because they're Black.
Your brothers? You just said your brothers.
They're my brothers. Yeah, they're like the sons of moms, and moms is a part of my life. They're family to me. They are family.
I misunderstood. I thought they were your actual brothers.
Well, I'd say they are my actual brothers. Like, we have been enough through life, and we're brothers. Like, I talk with their family.
So what I mean to say is I did not recognize the ethnicity of them.
You thought from the same womb?
Yes. So now that that's clear, what you're saying is some people of color that said...
No, brothers. They're not just some random people.
I'm not trying to say they're random. I'm saying... I
wasn't just walking down the street going, hey, how come the Rolling Stones are selling out O2 and Stevie Wonder can't get a fucking concert going?
All right. I get it. I totally understand what you're implying there and what they're saying, which is that, but my idea that the economics of it, I think, still are a factor. Like, per capita, the amount of Black people in poverty, people of color in poverty in this culture is far and away above the amount of white people. And so music that white people listen to is more supportable because they have more disposable income, not because there's some kind of lack of devotion or lack of dedication on the part of the people of color audience to the people that they listen to.
The nuances of this statement could open up a whole Pandora's box of worms.
Open up, baby.
I would be very interested to see a Stevie Wonder stadium tour where tickets were like $20. And possibly you can't do that because maybe just economically it's not a reasonable thing to do. But one of the things you and I spoke about Thursday night was there was Dave Chappelle who could charge $600 a ticket if he wanted to. That place would have sold out, no problem. And they were affordable tickets to you and I. They were, well, a little bit of fringe there. No, what I'm saying is like you and I were both like, there was a minute where Not a minute. There was a couple of seconds where we were looking at each other going, are we really going to do this? Because it's a little out of budget. It's not the budget we had hoped for.
Well, I'm looking at the Stevie Wonder history of concerts, and there are a lot of theaters listed, especially in the 60s, and not a lot of stadiums.
But what they were saying is now, like the fact that Stevie's older, like they think, these young bucks who are doing hip hop and rap and, they're selling out coliseums and stuff. But they were saying, someone who's in their 70s and 80s to pull in a stadium show and sell it out, not a person of color.
So right now for 2019, Red Rocks Amphitheater, Hyde Park, the Three Arena, those were the actual listed Stevie Wonder events. When
were they?
They were in 2019, 2020. Here, let me see what his tour is for 2022.
Well, I was arguing that he would. I thought people would show up, and they were saying.
Okay, and the tour dates are loading on this webpage.
Okay, so part of the thing that often, the argument, a person of color, and I'm not saying it's a wrong argument, but it does seem like a bit of a tip of the iceberg statement. Like, well, it's like a dismissal statement, is when you bring up like a person who is a person of color or black and is overtly supporting Trump and loud about it and out in public about it. And they say, yeah, that's how wicked the racism is, people support the master that's enslaving them. And there's a dismissal to that statement that isn't allowing for the humanity of that individual. I think like there's more going on with that individual. The fact that we're a racist country and the wealth of this country is built on the blood of black people is overtly obvious.
Right. But what we're trying to talk about here is whether white musical art,
yes, that's true. Thank you for getting me back on top.
Evolved from, and you could argue that certain branches of country music or Appalachian music might have evolved from ancestral Europeans, but to a large degree, popular music rests on the form rock and roll, Marshall Mathers, that from things that originated from people of color.
Right. But here's the thing. If you and I are in a band and I'm like, let's bring taiko drums into the fucking mix.
You mean taiko drums?
Taiko drums. Yeah. Like, yeah, let's do it. Yeah. You don't say, no, well, those are Japanese and you can't do that. Like if we're down to brass tacks, humanity originated in Africa. So everything originated in Africa, even Whitey. So, it's back to my thing of creativity is love and love gives. It doesn't hold it on.
Well, apparently the Rolling Stones didn't want to give, which is why they had to be taken to court.
Well, let's look at the facts of that one. So I know that with Led Zeppelin, but really let's look up Rolling Stones sued for stealing music.
Yeah. And that's the thing, white promoters would do big concerts by, say, Ike and Tina Turner, and Ike and Tina would get paid, maybe $1,500, but the white promoter would walk away with $20,000. It's like there was this expectation of capitalism being able to just treat people of color as subhuman and to take their artistic works as if they owned them. And, just the idea that the blues rock genre of the 60s was, no one asked, the originators of that music if they could borrow those chord progressions. They just did it. And then they made millions of dollars off of it and didn't really compensate anybody for it. And that's, I think, the underlying point that people are making is that in the misappropriation of music that's evolved from cultures of color without any form of compensation, without even like acknowledging it as at a relative level. And later on, Keith Richards, to his credit, he went in and he produced a whole film about Chuck Berry, and he made sure that people understood.
And he got punched by Chuck Berry.
What?
He got punched by Chuck Berry.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is there were attempts by people to sort of honor the legacy from which they had borrowed, from which they had stolen. And I think that's a small form of reparations ultimately. But so much of the Delta blues informs so many white rock players, and that they just, no one comes up and says, we want to thank all the Delta blues musicians from the past, like Blind Boy Slim and, all of these amazing.
Yeah, but could you picture you're at Kings Beach and you guys are up on stage and you're like, yeah, we want to thank Bob Marley. And
we did. We did.
All right. How'd that go down?
Well, because I'm there, that's one of the things that happened.
So how'd it go down?
It was great. Say? People cheered when we played the song.
No, but
we spoke up. We spoke up and we said, we get to do this. It's an amazing thing. And we couldn't, if we got up here and didn't say thank you to people like Bob Marley, then we'd be remiss in what we were doing. Right. And that's just a small piece, right? Just acknowledging it. But it's simple and it's not that hard. Right.
So do you think Elvis was a bigot?
I have no idea. The things that I've seen would tend to indicate not, specifically because we both watched that same film where a whole bunch of black R&B and blues artists talked about his generosity and the way that he treated people fairly. And that whole story about how they were in Vegas and, the promoters were trying to tell Elvis's backup singers that they couldn't come in through the main entrance and all that. And Elvis said, well, they're in my band, and so if they can't come in, no one's coming in, right? And then, of course, they were able.
You're going to give them a convertible and have that little white girl drive them around, and they're
So there's definitely some indications that Elvis, worked to resolve some of that stuff.
And did you watch the Ray Charles interview?
No, I haven't had time to watch that, but. An analysis might be that those are performative, that he did things like that to compensate for a much bigger sort of reality. Like, how much did he earn on those shows and how much did he pay royalties to the original songwriters? How much did they get from Elvis? And in that sense, it's not Elvis as a bigot, but that the marketing and distribution and the way that the white concert industry capitalizes on black creative works is out of balance with what should be being done, the way they should be paid. And there's huge, families of people who are descendants of these amazing musicians who inspired these people who are dying of poverty and illness, who have nothing.
The disparity of sales did not stop Dr. Dre from producing Eminem albums. And I think on a basic level, there's two creative artists who loved working with each other, and their juice together created great music. And that was ultimately what was important to them.
Yeah. And last week, you said on this podcast that Prince didn't make as much money as he did from the album he released himself as all of the records that he did with his record label that was white owned at the time.
Right.
So there's a history of the economics of this being one of exploitation and the taking of the lion's share of the rewards.
Which I don't think has anything to do with color. It's fucking greedy capitalism where I can get 90 and give you 10, and too bad for you.
Well, the mentality that feeds that specific to black people is real. It's not just black people. It's not everyone that does that. It's, like, look at the Beach Boys. Beach Boys.
I don't know. What's his name? Don Kane isn't known for, being a great manager to all the boxers he represented.
But you're switching subjects midstream. All right.
No, I'm talking about business capitalism and the manager, the like person who's in charge of the business, just taking a lion's share, and the person who's actually creating.
But you've removed the musical context by talking about Don King. Talk about music. Talk about the ways.
No, but now we're talking about business and the creativity and talents of someone being sold.
I mean, I don't want to argue that boxing isn't an art, but I think you're comparing apples to oranges in this case.
I don't think I am.
I know that. That's why you're doing it. But think of it this way. The idea that you can take a 1-4-5 chord progression, which originated from deep in the South in amongst people of color, and then just use it to write, your own version of a blues song, and then make more money without acknowledgement or without compensation or any of it. That was a huge part of the 60s, rock and roll legacy, and even 50s doo-wop.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, look at, I'm saying art is taking things and interacting with other creative people, and it becomes part of your ingredients and your own creative process. If I do happen to actually do stand-up, which is still being debated, it would be foolish if I didn't incorporate Dave Chappelle and Richard Pryor and Red Fox and all these other, Chris Rock. Like, just part of their essence and spirit should be part of my spice, because I would be a damn fool.
If you went up and did one of Richard Pryor's routines, word for word, what would happen?
That's outright stealing.
Well, that's exactly what you're talking about.
But no, I'm not. Because
yes, you are. Because
talking about music. No, because here's the difference.
That's what happened. Is that a whole bunch of white people took the exact same chords and the exact same rhythmic structure, and they made it their own, and they capitalized on it without compensating anyone or asking permission.
Well, then that was stealing.
Yeah. All right. The podcast is
over.
And who were they? Right. You're wrong.
What was their name? Jimmy Smith.
What do you mean? What was their name? Someone like looking at us online? Is that why you're distracted? What's going on here?
Yeah, I'm looking online to see
if anyone's following us.
No, to see if
I feel like someone might be following us.
Beach Boys. Brian Wilson said he intended this very obvious lift of 1958's Sweet Little 16 as a tribute to Chuck Berry, but Berry's legal team saw it another way. In one of rock's first major plagiarism cases, the Beach Boys settled by giving away the rights, and Berry's name began appearing on the single a few years later.
Why didn't it happen right from the get-go?
Right.
Because Brian Wilson's father wanted money.
So that goes into that realm, but that wasn't Brian himself. And again, like what keeps coming up, so I'm going to say it, and you may like spit in my face because, you're going to say, that's not music, Wilker, and I'm going to fucking... Anyway, so Andy Warhol and the famous Campbell's soup can thing, and him taking images that were commonplace and then putting some color to them and calling it art and getting millions of dollars. Like, that's part of creativity. And I'm just thinking of Van Gogh and Gauguin and how they hung out with each other and learned from each other and then argued with each other. But that was part of Vincent's trajectory of creativity, just like Frida Kahlo and what's her husband's name? I just spaced out his name.
The great muralist.
Yeah. Like their interaction with each other was part of their creative journey.
But they were embedded in the culture of Mexico. There was no appropriation there. They were Mexicans together.
No, but
They
she
weren't stealing
learned
African painting style.
She learned specifically from him. So for her to sign her paintings, Frida and whatever the fuck his name is,
Diego Rivera.
Thank you. Would be ridiculous.
But
Now, if she painted his mural and signed it Frida, that's stealing. If I do a joke about Greg Wilker being on fire running down the street and I'm holding up a burning match, that's stealing. But if I do a joke about Greg Wilker getting in an accident, and I've heard that the world is telling this joke all over the place, and so I'm kind of really making fun of the fact that I'm a joke in the world. That's just creativity. I learned from Richard Pryor that I can do that. And so
let's try a thought experiment.
Okay.
Let's switch roles in this discussion.
Okay.
I'm going to advocate now that embellishment and
I'm ready. All right, go for it. You first. Go for it.
All right. So there's a thing in copyright law called derivative works, right? Where when you copyright something, you sign an affidavit claiming that it was not created derivatively from any other composition.
Okay.
Right. So what you do is when you have an original composition, you send it into the Library of Congress. Right. Okay. And it's like, okay, this is mine. Right. And it costs $39 to get.
The man said it was.
What?
Because the man said it was. Like you gave it to the man's library and the man put a stamp on it and said, yep, this is yours.
Exactly. Okay. And so I own it now. Right. Okay. Right. And then as long as it's not derivative, then I own it cleanly. Right. And I invented it. Right. Okay. And then after that, anyone else should need to license my work from me. Right. If they want to use it. Right. But I've been listening to music all my life. And who knows what kind of subliminal things
that's
came
the thing
through.
George Harrison, My Sweet Lord thing. Yeah.
Bob Marley, and the Banana Splits, right? The Bob Marley's lick, woy, oy, oy, woy, oy, oy, oy. It's directly from the Banana Splits. And I don't think Bob even knew
that the Banana Splits
and
existed.
At this point, I don't think they've ever been asked to pay royalties either, right? But it's hilarious because it's subliminal and unconscious. So there is this aspect of how music gets into our souls and it gets into our creative aspects, and it comes out and we're not even consciously aware. And so misappropriation applies this idea of consciously taking something from someone.
Right. So I guess like the Beach Boys settled because Brian Wilson said, I absolutely lifted a piece of Chuck Berry in homage to him.
And Chuck said, great, I'll take that homage in $5 bills.
Right. Yeah. And he did. And he got it.
But he had to fight for it.
Right.
Brian didn't offer it to him. Right. I thought we were supposed to be arguing different points.
I know. Well, you started off on a fucking whole copyright thing. I was so ready to just hear your argument, then go, you're right.
I'm like the moray eels of ideas. Once I get it in my teeth, I can't let go.
Well, that's kind of part of the problem, I think, which you and I have spoken of. You're the problem. You and I have talked a lot about that. No, we get these things in our teeth. Like that's the whole thing about Elvis Presley being a bigot. Is I think it's like you don't want to let go of that because it's feeding my fire, and like, well, fuck your fire.
Yeah, like let's see if we can break that down. Like, when was Elvis a bigot? Let's find some evidence.
And my understanding of Peter Tosh is he was not a person who took fools to heart. He didn't rub elbows.
He didn't suffer fools. You're right.
Right. And he
was from Kingston, where they'll kill you for a piece of corn.
And he had a great time recording with Mick Jagger and putting out music together.
Well, they were paying him big money at the time.
Well, so
they signed him and said, "Here's a pile of money."
No, but also you could see creatively, they liked playing together.
That's true. That is
And
true.
that's where I think the whole thing of business and creativity, why artists have a lot of trouble with it, because there is often from white capitalist cis straight culture with horns on their head, it's all money and no heart. But
Well, I think it's worth noting that Peter Tosh was about to buy the one and only radio station in Jamaica 1 week before he was murdered.
Wow.
And that he was partially why he was murdered was that he was about to own the airwaves in Jamaica, and he had a very radical political viewpoint that was about to become very powerful in Jamaica.
Yeah, wasn't he a stepping razor?
Yeah, don't you watch my size? I'm dangerous.
Fuck yeah, I love that song.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that I've spent a whole bunch of my musical career playing Jamaican style music. And for the first part of it, I wasn't crediting anyone with it, right?
Because you were too stoned on Jamaican weed.
No, on California weed, let's be clear. But,
oh, you discrepant.
One of the great
Jamaican brown weed.
I had some Jamaican lamb's bread, it was called, that was literally some of the stoniest weed I've ever had. Wow. Right up there with, Northern California Sensi.
Yeah. Purple buds.
One thing I'll say about myself at 59 years old, and been listening to reggae since I was 14, who began to play reggae songs as soon as I could figure out how to play them rhythmically, that I never once grew my hair out and grew dreadlocks because I knew that that was culturally inappropriate.
It's mighty white of you. I see. Right. That's the thing. I think if you want fucking dreads, go for it. Cornrows look badass. The fucking things that they do with the braids and the tight braids and the sculptures of the hair looks badass, man.
So reverse that. What would be a white thing, cultural thing that you would be offended at if someone wore it?
Circumcision.
Like we're ever going to know.
Yeah, I hope I never know.
So what you're saying is you're offended by my penis?
For all you circumcised people that aren't Jewish, you're misappropriating genitalia savagery.
That's not funny.
Yeah, it is.
So what you're saying is if I started wearing a yarmulke, you wouldn't care?
I wouldn't fucking care.
Yeah. Well, I think it should be noted that two white guys having this conversation is a bit myopic. There's a piece of this puzzle that we can't quite comprehend, and we would need a third party here to really balance the conversation out. And I just want to call that out. Like, our white privilege allows us to be unconscious of some of the nuances of this discussion.
That is real. And what was real in the Ray Charles interview was it was obvious he didn't think a whole lot about Elvis. Fine. That's a great thing. Like, that's your opinion. You don't have to like shit. I don't give a fuck. But here's what he did say where I was like, yeah, that sucks. That sucks. And that was Elvis got a whole lot of accolades and more popular by all these white women fawning all over him. And when Nat King Cole had the same thing happen to him in the South, he got in trouble. Now that fact points to why I understand why someone's so pissed off about, these black artists who are getting pennies while Whitey's in his fucking country mansion castle bullshit. I get it. However, for me, the bottom line is creativity is love, and it gives, and it's just for everyone. I hope that
we're all better off if we can have a rich palette to draw from.
Exactly.
Right? But you've got to give credit where credit is due, including economic credit.
Who invented pink?
You mean the artist or the color?
The color. I
have no clue.
Exactly. Who invented a drum beat? Who invented 4/4 time?
Well,
Exactly.
We could start talking about that in a way.
Well, then you get to the point that I said earlier. Yeah, it seems scientifically humanity originated in Africa. So yeah, everything came from Africa that's living, except
No.
roses.
Jazz,
Roses came from somewhere else.
jazz came from the United States.
But yeah, the
And it was
roots of
appropriated
jazz
by
are
white people.
African and European music.
Jazz was appropriated by white people. Benny Goodman.
I can't. I'm going to just throw up into the back of my throat right now. Excuse me.
Because people didn't want to acknowledge or have black people in their clubs, except in places like New York, St. Louis, you know.
Yes, and that was racism.
Yeah.
Hard at work. Yeah, absolutely.
But meanwhile, they still
But
wanted
the musicians
the
themselves,
inspiration of the art. They still wanted to hear the complex tonalities of amazing jazz composers, but they didn't want to acknowledge black people.
No, see, I don't.
Tommy Dorsey would have never, ever come up with the arrangements that he had if he hadn't listened to people like Duke Ellington.
Right. And the Rolling Stones wouldn't have come up with the arrangements they had if they weren't listening to black blues records.
Right.
Yeah.
So we agree.
You wouldn't be playing the music of, what's your band's name? Illusions?
Illumination.
Illumination. alluding to reggae. No. Lumination. You wouldn't be playing Lumination music if you hadn't listened to reggae since you were 14.
If none of us hadn't, you know, if we hadn't heard, you know, Joe Higgs, and we hadn't heard Peter Tosh, and we hadn't heard, you know, Alpha Blondie and all of these amazing artists.
Gregory Isaac.
I mean, the list is too long to mention. And it should be said that a lot of the emotional weight that goes with the artistic output, the value of it in its emotional resonance, is the soul life of a suffering people. And for someone who is of white privilege and white status to play the blues is a misunderstanding of the depth of where that pain comes from. And this, I mean, Steve, what's Steve's, the white comedian?
Steve Wright.
No. Oh God, he had a really great TV show that was, it was hilarious. Anyway, the lyrics of the song was, he did a blues song. He's all, I woke up this morning and threw my drink across the lawn. Boom, boom. Martin, somebody.
Steve Martin?
No, it wasn't Steve Martin. It was a contemporary of his. But
wait, you're talking about, he had that TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, where that little town.
Yeah.
Martin Mull.
And that song is the perfect epitome of what we're talking about, because it's just, you know, it's.
And then there are people like your sister who shared a couple weeks ago of her personal journey is dripping with pain.
And Marshall Mathers. Whose life was horrific, right?
Exactly.
And who had the added cojones, the added chutzpah, courage to go into the work of that in 9 Mile and go to battles and show up and lay it down and prove himself in the culture that he was. And
he's super transparent with his lyrics and what he shares with the world. And, that was leading me to something. God damn it. Marshall Mathers, pain. I don't remember. I was about to
take your vitamins, everyone.
See, I crossed over. I'm just waiting to die now. Rocking chair and a pipe, waiting to die.
Put on some old Rolling Stones records and sit in the rocking chair.
Talk about, this is what I was going to talk about. With 2 weeks ago in Heal Thyself, and I forget the doctor's name, but he was
Dr. Haru Kuti.
Thank you, Dr. Haru Kuti. And he's talking about, like our bodies are ours. You know, you're in your body. It's obviously yours. I'm in my body. It's obviously mine. Well, what if someone's got a fucking metal choker on my neck and it's chained to another one, and I'm held in a cage and I'm sold like property, and the emotional life that I have is for naught. Doesn't mean anything as my kids are ripped away from me, my loved ones ripped away from me, on and on and on. And that's for generations and generations. And how does a great, 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 great grandchild grow up when they don't have autonomy? That is pain. And that's what I think you're speaking of earlier, where you're saying like we as whiteys can't really talk about the kind of pain that is feeding the blues music. There's
level
that
of generational trauma that we've experienced is infinitesimal by comparison.
Absolutely.
Some exceptions in the Irish community, but mostly not.
But yeah, I mean, not generational the way the chattel slavery has persisted in Europe and Western culture. Absolutely. Now, the thing is, like you mentioned, Marshall Mathers, to be, beat up, to see his mom beat up, to see, the drugs and drinking and just poverty. And that's what Elvis came from too. I don't know about the beating up thing, but Elvis grew up in absolute poverty. Poverty is a disease. It's like, it's horrid. It's horrid. And that, to see like Whitey did create the ghetto, and ghettos are horrendous. I acknowledge that, but we do know pain. You know pain in your life. I know pain in my life. I know pain where it seemed hopeless. And that moment, the reality is bleak, and to label and give hierarchy to someone's moment of hopelessness is a mistake.
Yeah. The reality is that one of the reasons music is a universal language is that we can all empathize with the pain and the joy that comes through it. And we want to avoid limiting that human expression with contexts that are sort of like cancel culture are in our country right now and in the world. And the idea is we should celebrate creativity and acknowledge its origins whenever we're sort of in the zone of using materials that have come through other lineages. And one of the great things about my musical history is listening to Paul Simon's Graceland album, which is kind of an interesting thing because it's African music labeled Graceland, played by Ladysmith Black Mambazo. And everyone knew, there was no question about that album, that he had used all African musicians and that he had taken them on tour, and it was a massive hit for him. It was like one of the biggest albums of his career. Yeah, and he made no bones about who the geniuses were on that record. He just simply got up there and was the singer lyricist. And, But
here's the thing though. He didn't seek them out thinking, I'm going to fucking make millions. This is going to be the biggest album I ever
did it because he loved the music and the style, and he wanted to write in that style.
And they wanted to play with him and Ladysmith Black
Mambazo.
Thank you. Their careers were definitely propelled by it. Now you get into the nuances of who made what money from that. That'd be an interesting thing to find out. I don't know that.
I guarantee you Paul made most of the money.
Well,
but now a whole bunch more people in the world know who Ladysmith Black Mambazo is, and all of their records got purchased. So there's some mutuality there. I think probably the most powerful thing I have to offer this conversation is there's a YouTube video by Bobby McFerrin where he talks about the pentatonic scale and the universality of music. And so my encouragement to the audience is to go look up Bobby McFerrin talking about the pentatonic scale and see how he leads an audience through singing.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, that's
and it tells you who we are at a root level is common and connected.
That's, I think, spot on.
Recording stopped.